Alright, hello my friends, and welcome back. Hope you're all doing well. So today I have something special for you. I'm putting together a guide to the best unit techs for every unit in Mechabellum. You may or may not know that every unit has an array of different tech upgrades that you can take, and you get to equip 4 of them before the match, and you bring those 4 into the match, which you can then purchase during matches. I'm going to talk about what those are for each unit, which ones I think are the best, and why. To give you a little bit of an intro to me, I guess at time of recording, I'm in the top 100 Mechabellum players in North America, top 300 in the world by MMR, which of course is the metric that matters because it determines how good you are relative to other players. Obviously, there can be some disagreement, and top players have different preferences for which abilities they use, so you may see different loadouts than these, but these are my preferences and what I would personally suggest that you use. Also, of course, this information is only current to time of recording, which is July 31st, 2023, so if you're watching this in a couple years, obviously things will have changed quite a bit since then. If you enjoy this guide, please do let me know, and since this is a bit of an experiment in terms of content for me, and I will continue on with the next few units. So today I'm going to be covering the 100 credit units. These are the bread and butter of just about every army in Mechabellum. You're going to be using some combination of these units in every single build that you have, so it's really important that you have the right loadout on them. Those are Crawler, Fang, Marksman, and Arclight. I'm going to be talking through each ability they have available in order, and I'll read out what the abilities do as well, but if you want to follow along on the wiki or something like that just to have the stats in front of you, then definitely do that. Alright, let's get started with the Crawler. So the Crawler, I think, is secretly the best unit in the game. You can use it to distract enemy fire, you can use it to overwhelm enemy single-shot units like the Marksman. The Crawler is very, very important. I think there are almost no builds that aren't going to involve at least a couple units of crawlers, and it's pretty much never wrong to just add a few crawlers in various locations around the map. As well, you can use them to flank or catch enemies off guard. So keeping that in mind, when we are choosing our upgrades for crawlers, something that you should keep in mind is that we're going to rarely upgrade crawlers. They're so efficient the way they are, costing only 100 credits, and you don't generally get a ton of value from upgrading them, whether to level 2 or with a tech upgrade. So our tech upgrades are generally selected in order to take enemies by surprise and steal rounds from them, overwhelm enemy crawlers, or basically just catch an enemy off guard with one of these tech upgrades and steal a round. For that reason, I've mostly chosen the cheap upgrades, but I'll talk about what they do and why you should take them. So first up, Mechanical Rage. This costs 200 credits and increases their movement by 5 meters a second from 16 to 21, and reduces their attack interval by 0.4 seconds from 1.2 to 0.8, so it's a 33% speed increase for their attack, and therefore their DPS. Mechanical Rage on pretty much every unit that has it available is one of the best upgrades in the game, and I suggest you select it for basically every unit that can. Attack speed is really good because it lets you clear through multiple enemy units. This matters more not on crawlers, but is also really important for crawlers. And movement speed is great for crawlers because the roles that you're using crawlers for are primarily flanking from the rear, so flanking faster with your crawlers is good, and distracting Stormcaller fire or other single-shot units by getting in on top of them, and of course the faster you get in on them, the better. You'll usually buy Mechanical Rage with flanking crawlers if you happen to have a ton of crawlers. If you get subsidized crawler and are leveling your crawlers, then Mechanical Rage is really efficient. Overall, I think you're not going to buy it a ton, but it's important to have it available for when you want it. Replicate also costs 200 credits, and what this does is when your crawler kills an enemy, it makes another crawler. This means basically when your crawlers are fighting crawlers or fangs, you can generate a huge amount of chaff units just from your crawlers, and you can really use this to steal waves from your enemy, steal rounds from your enemy. If you have, for example, a flanking unit of crawlers that are being countered out by an opposing unit of fangs, switching on Replicate will allow them to eat those fangs. If your crawlers are fighting a lot of enemy crawlers, you can turn a bunch of crawlers into yours and double the amount of damage that you're doing with your crawlers to your opponent's life total in the round, overwhelm things like sledgehammers and so on. Acidic Explosion, I think, is the one you're going to take least of these, but I think it's a nice tool to have in the arsenal, because this allows your crawlers to have some utility. If your crawlers are getting into melee with an enemy heavy unit, like a sledgehammer, a steel ball, or any heavy robot, then Acidic Explosion can be a ton of extra damage from a unit that, from an angle your opponent wouldn't normally have expected, and that can be a really interesting path to stealing around. It also reduces the armor of those units, so it gives them a huge amount of extra utility. Acidic Explosion costs 200 and causes your destroyed crawlers to leave a pool of acid on the ground, which causes the enemy to lose 6% of their maximum HP, so against a giant robot, it will do tons and tons of damage, way more than the crawler's attacks would have done, and also reduces the enemy defense, which makes your marksmen, your own giant units, so on, more easily able to kill them. If your opponent has giant units that aren't Vulcans, or if their Vulcans are killing your crawlers and then walking forward into the space where the crawlers died in, Acidic Explosion can give you a ton of extra utility against those enemy heavy units and really help you steal a wave. Finally, Impact Drill. This is mostly useful against Arclights and Sledgehammers. It allows a unit of crawlers with Impact Drill to actually kill an Arclight. If they're the same level, normally the Arclight would just sweep up all those crawlers, but with Impact Drill you get in on it, they do enough damage, and they just kill the Arclight. So if your opponent is relying heavily on isolated Arclights or Sledgehammer units, you can go Impact Drill and take them by surprise. It increases the crawler damage by 200%, so triples your damage. Again, I think the one you're most likely to buy, the ones of these you're most likely to buy in a round are Mechanical Rage and Replicate, but the other two have some pretty useful edges as well. Finally, Subterranean Blitz. This one costs 300, so it's alone in the crawler upgrades in costing more than 200, which is the primary reason that we're not taking it. It increases the movement speed by 3 meters per second and causes your crawlers to, when they're not in melee combat, tunnel under the ground, taking less damage from enemy fire. 70% less damage from enemy fire. They pop up from the ground before they attack. The reason I think this isn't good is mostly that it costs 300, so that's just a huge investment into a unit that should be cheap, should be chaff, should just be a distraction for your enemy. You could just get 3 more units of crawlers for that if you, instead of Subterranean Blitz, or a higher tier unit that could do more damage or help you out more. And additionally, it makes you move slower than Mechanical Rage, which gives you 5 points of movement, whereas Subterranean Blitz is only 3. So if you just need the movement speed, Mechanical Rage is better. Finally, if in the case where you are actually attacking with your crawlers, then they pop out of the ground and you lose the Subterranean Blitz bonus immediately. So it basically gives them like another Arclight shot they could tank, but either Mechanical Rage or Impact Drill is better against Arclights in particular. Subterranean Blitz has some utility against Sledgehammers, and the other thing that it's good for is if you're using your crawlers with a mobile beacon to move perpendicular to your enemy's lines and cause their Stormcallers to miss, but in that case this crawler's default speed is fine, and if you need additional speed, Mechanical Rage is going to serve you better overall anyways. So mostly for the cost, but also because I think it generally has the least utility of these upgrades, the one I suggest skipping out on is Subterranean Blitz. Alright, let's talk about the Fang. So, Fangs also only have 5 available upgrades, so we take 4 and we leave 1 behind. Fangs serve a similar role to crawlers much of the time in that they're chaff. The difference between Fangs and crawlers is that your Fangs are slow, so if you need them to stay in position to absorb shots, they'll just do that naturally. And secondly, that Fangs are ranged. So you can actually build Fangs into a totally reasonable source of DPS, and in fact, my personal favorite builds in the game usually involve carry Fangs. So I would suggest having available to you the ability to build your Fangs both into chaff and into very powerful carry units. Fangs cost 100 to buy. You get 18 of them in a unit, so there's a lot of them. They're really nice. All of these abilities are added up over all of those units. Let's talk about each one in turn. First up, range enhancement. Much like Mechanical Rage, I think range enhancement is an ability that you are going to take on every single unit that it shows up on, pretty much. It costs 300 and increases the attack range of your Fangs by 40, which moves them from a default attack range of 80 to 120. That's rivaling or exceeding most units in the game unupgraded, other than like Marksman and Stormcallers, and allows them to very effectively counter enemy Wasps, enemy Phoenixes, allows them to DPS down enemy Fangs at range. Why is range enhancement so good? And it's usually the first upgrade you're going to go on almost any unit that can take it, but especially if you're building your Fangs into damage, it's one of the first you'll take on them as well. It's so good for a couple reasons. One, of course, it just lets them beat enemy Fangs. Range is going to be more powerful for defeating enemy units one-to-one than any of these other upgrades, because they can start shooting first, which means they're thinning the enemy numbers. So a range-enhanced Fang is going to beat any of these other upgrades in one-on-one combat, assuming that you start at maximum range. Secondly, it allows you to decide where your Fangs position themselves in the fight. If you have your Fangs in front of some other units, like let's say a unit of sledgehammers, and you buy range enhancement on them, they're going to stop and allow your sledgehammers to move through them and tank for them. But you could also just not buy range enhancement if you'd rather your Fangs take the hit. Like let's say your enemy is using steel balls or marksman, and you'd rather have the Fangs tank the hit. You just don't buy range enhancement, the Fangs move forward and take hits for your sledgehammers. So between just being very powerful on its own and also giving you a ton of utility in allowing which units to engage, I think range enhancement is massively important. Mechabellum is basically a game about trying to match your units to your opponent's units favorably. Generally speaking, marginal upgrades aren't going to do a lot, and the unit matchups are what really matters in terms of winning. Positioning more than just general like stats is how you win this game. And range enhancement basically allows you to position. Secondly, mechanical rage. So that's for exactly the same reason that we talked about it with crawlers. Mechanical rage is really good. It lets them move into position. If you want them to get out of head of a slower unit, you can give them mechanical rage. So it serves a similar thing to range enhancement in that way. It costs 300 and boosts their movement speed by 5 meters per second, and their attack rate by 33%, so from 1.5 to 1. So you actually get a bigger attack speed boost from mechanical rage on Fangs than you do on crawlers, which does matter, but you also pay a little more for it. Generally, mechanical rage is going to be really, really good on Fangs because they're ranged, so the attack interval reduction, the attack speed increase, is going to apply much more frequently. And also, if you have like backline Fangs that you want to get up into the fight, a very common play pattern is to place Fangs behind, in the left and right flank behind your towers to stop opposing flanks. And then if you mechanical rage those Fangs, they can kill whatever you're dealing with on the flanks and then move up into the frontline engagement more quickly. It's also a core component of the carry Fang build. You're going to get range and mechanical rage, and that will allow your Fangs to defeat enemy air units very easily, and also just deal a ton of damage at range to most enemy units. Next, Portable Shield. So Portable Shield is really important to have available on your Fangs. If you're going to choose to take Ignite over any of these, I would suggest taking it over Armor-Piercing Bullets, but definitely not over Portable Shield. This is the most important upgrade to have on your Fangs. How it works is it costs 400 and gives every single Fang an energy shield that absorbs damage equal to its HP. But more importantly, it also always absorbs at least one instance of damage. So whether that instance of damage is a single crawler attack for 100 or a level 9 marksman shot for 25,000, the shield is going to block all of it. So if your opponent has Phoenixes, Wasps, Sledgehammers, Marksman Arclights. The portable shield is going to block a ton of the damage that they are outlaying and keep your fangs alive against it. It makes them extremely effective chaff units, so you can place them in front of more valuable targets to tank shots. Also, if your opponent just happens to be hitting your carry fangs, you can go into portable shield. You may end up with all 4 upgrades that you take on fangs. That's not terribly uncommon. It's one of the few units that I think you will sometimes upgrade with all 4 units, all 4 upgrades. And portable shield is incredible value to have. You can basically think of it as just doubling the number of fangs you have on the field, because it makes them all take an extra hit to kill. So if you have 6 or 7 units of fangs, you're paying 400 for a portable shield to effectively buy 700 or 600, 700, 800 credits worth of additional fangs. Hugely important upgrade. Definitely don't leave home without it. Finally, I think it's a choice between armor-piercing bullets and ignite, and I think these two are actually pretty close. The reason I think armor-piercing bullets has the edge is that it is very effective against stuff like sledgehammers and phoenixes, as well as steel balls. It allows you to kill them. Ignite is better against giant units, but for giants, I think you just want to mix in phoenixes or marksmen or melting points, something along those lines. Fortresses or hackers are also very common to play with fangs because they can shield your fangs. And if you have watched any of my other videos, you will know that hacker fang is my favorite unit combination, one that I think is very well positioned in the meta and does very well against most enemy builds right now. And so those heavy units, the hackers or fortresses, are going to be taking care of enemy heavy units. So we would rather have our fangs just clear enemy chaff even quicker, do well against marksmen, phoenixes, arclights, and so on, and armor-piercing bullets with plus 50% damage does a better job, I think, of doing that than ignite. Costs 200, increases your damage by 50%. Ignite costs 300 and gives your attacks a chance to ignite an enemy target unit. This chance is basically 100% because all your fangs are going to be shooting the same thing, so they'll get ignited by 1 unit of fangs. You don't really have to worry about the chance part of it. When they're ignited, they lose 6% of their maximum HP per second for 2 seconds. So Ignite is very, very good against heavy enemy units like fortresses, even enemy Vulcans. This can allow your fangs to do well against. But generally, I think you're better off using units that are specialized against those units rather than trying to build your fangs into counters for them. You can, for the same amount that you would buy Ignite on your fangs, purchase like a unit and a half of phoenixes, purchase most of a melting point, purchase 3 marksmen, and that will allow you to clear through heavy enemy units a little better, I think, in general. So my advice for fangs is take range, mechanical rage, and portable shield. Then I think there's a little more of a toss-up between armor-piercing bullets and ignite, but I think armor-piercing bullets has the edge. Next, let's talk about the Marksman. So the Marksman is our first one that has 6 abilities available, and I think 3 of them are absolute must-takes, and then 1 of them you basically never want. But there are 2 that I think are interchangeable depending on how you build the rest of your units. So I'll talk about those in a second. Range enhancement, we already talked in the Fang section about why that's so good. It's even better for Marksman, where the main thing on Marksman is just that they are very, very long range. So this costs 300, increases your range by 40. That goes from 140 to 180. It means that your Marksman can rival a Stormcaller in range. They can outfight enemy Marksmen and enemy Phoenixes extremely reliably. It allows them to stay out of range of enemy melting points or fortresses or whatever and DPS them down. This is the upgrade that you're going to get first on just about every time you want to upgrade Marksman. Range enhancement is the first thing that you'll buy. Secondly, I'm actually going to skip down a bit to Elite Marksman, which costs 400 and gives you 8 meters of range. So what's that, 1/5 of the amount that range enhancement gives. And 23% damage, but that increases per level of the Marksman. So at level 1, you get 8 meters of range and 23% of damage. At level 2, you get 16 meters and 46% of damage. If you're building into carry marksman, if your marksmen are going to be your main damage source, elite marksman is mandatory to have, and it will allow your marksman to shoot like across the map. Once you get up to level 4 or 5, or if you're a marksman specialist who starts with the level 3 marksman, elite marksman is going to give you a ton of value on your marksman and overall just allow you to deal tons more damage. It can let your marksman just one-tap overlords or wildly outperform against enemy steel balls or sledgehammers, sledgehammers especially. It's vulnerable to enemy chaff units, of course, but that's always going to be the counter to marksman, so you'll want to pair this with chaff clear like a Vulcan, like an Arclight, even like Mustangs or something along those lines. But elite marksman is I would say mandatory to have, because 1 in like 10 games you're going to go carry marksman, and you need this upgrade to have it, and that will to have that option available to you. Next up, I think we can kind of pair off the remaining 2 upgrades as a choice between either quick reload or double shot. So quick reload costs 300 and makes your marksman do half damage but attack twice as fast. Double shot costs 300 and makes your marksman attack 15% slower, but attack twice. So double shot is an actual DPS increase, and quick reload isn't. So you have to decide if you want that. But I personally believe that elite marksman and range enhancement are going to increase your actual damage dealt more than double shot will, for a couple reasons. One, double shot always targets the same unit. So like, let's say your marksman attacks a unit of crawlers, both shots are going to hit one crawler. It'll die to the first one, and the second one will be wasted. So you've effectively decreased your DPS against chaff units. This works even against things like enemy marksmen or enemy phoenixes, which marksman one-shot. And so double shot against those units is wasted. Against units that actually can survive through the double shot, again, I think you're going to be mostly better off with elite marksmen if you want your marksmen to kill them, or getting units that are specialized in taking out heavy enemy units. And those can, of course, include phoenixes or melting points. Marksmen, I think, are best against opposing marksmen and opposing phoenixes and overlords. And double shot also is particularly weak against overlords because the opponent is very likely to bring the wasp summoning mothership ability on their overlords, which, if we make it all the way to part 4 of this guide, I will talk about when we get to the overlords. And that means that your double shot is very likely to be wasted against the chaff unit that the overlord provides for itself. And if it's already targeting the overlord, then you're doing great. You don't need double shot in order for your marksman to kill the overlord. So overall, I think quick reload is better because it can mitigate one of the weaknesses of marksmen, allow them to clear through wasps and get targeted on the overlords faster, allow them to get targeted off of mustangs or my small chaff units like that. It's still not going to help them clear through crawlers or fangs. Like, you're just never going to be happy if they're shooting those, but it doesn't hurt your DPS against large units, and it's important against enemy wasps and against enemy overlords with the wasp summoning. So I think overall you should favor quick reload. Finally, the last 2 upgrades are electromagnetic shot and shooting squad. Shooting Squad is really interesting, really unique, very cool upgrade. It costs 250 and means at the beginning of your round, the marksman summons 5 fangs. Those will appear in front of it in a little row. So against enemy phoenixes, against enemy marksmen, those fangs will tank the shot before your marksman takes shots. So this can be a really solid way to beat enemy marksmen or enemy phoenixes, which, like I said, are the primary thing that you want marksmen against is phoenixes, overlords, and marksmen. The shooting squad summoning is good against 2 of those 3 things, so it's got a lot of utility. On the other hand, you have to have electromagnetic shot on a few of your units. It's mandatory to have that available within your build. So whether you take electromagnetic shot on the marksman, I think, is mostly determined by where you have electromagnetic shot on your other units. And you need it available on things that you can reliably target to the units that you want to slow down, which are primarily rhinos, steel balls, sledgehammers, or what EMP shot is really, really good against. And so I think marksmen are a pretty good carrier for EMP because you want those shooting those units anyways. Whether you take EMP on the marksman, I think, is basically determined by whether you want it on your Arclights or not. I will say that I personally take it on Arclights and take Shooting Squad on the Marksman. I should also say EMP electromagnetic shot costs 300 and causes your shots to reduce enemy movement speed by 40% and disable all their tech upgrades. So all the things that we've just been talking about get disabled when they get hit by an EMP. This can be hugely valuable against steel balls by disabling their split into crawlers ability. It can be hugely valuable against sledgehammers by just slowing them down if they have mechanical rage, keeping them in place. It can turn off the Overlord Wasp summoning. It can turn off the Overlord ground cannon. Really, really valuable to have. Like I said, though, I think I tend to prefer it on Arclights because the Arclight splash damage means you can EMP multiple things, and that's really good. So I personally recommend Shooting Squad, but this is going to depend on how you have the rest of your unit set up, so I wanted to call out these two in particular as being abilities that have an interesting interaction with one another, and I think Shooting Squad is the most replaceable of these if you want EMP on your Marksman. A lot of top players, I think I'm one of the where I put EMP is more uncommon. I think you're more likely to see it on Marksman than on Arclights. So I definitely wanted to call that out as a difference in my play from other top players' play. And you should be able to make that decision based on what you see in your play and how you want to build the rest of your units. So just to sum that up real quick, Marksman, you should have range enhancement, you should have quick reload, you should have elite marksman in order of importance, range enhancement, marksman, quick reload, and then finally you should choose between electromagnetic shot and shooting squad based on what you have on your other units. I personally favor taking shooting squad. Next up, the Arclight. This is the last unit that we're covering today. So thanks for sticking with me if you've made it this far. This has been a fun deep dive, and as always, of course, if you've enjoyed this, do let me know. Leave a comment for the algorithm, blood for the blood god, comments for the algorithm throne, and subscribe to my channel for more of this, and we will be back with part 2 if people enjoy this. Anyways, getting on into the Arclight. Similarly, we have range enhancement and elite marksman. We talked about those when the marksman came up. Range enhancement and range enhancement still mandatory for every unit that can take it, pretty much. It costs 300, increases their range by 40 meters from 90 to 130, so that's almost a 50% increase. Huge value for your Arclights. This is going to be really good in several situations. One, if you need to start clearing chaff and your Arclights are out of range at the beginning, you can add range enhancement and they'll start shooting much earlier. 2, if you're building carry Arclights, which is definitely a real build that you can see my selections here support. Carry Arclights, I think, are a strong strategy to have available. I wouldn't suggest going for it most games, but having it available gives you a ton of options in play, and one of the things that I like to emphasize in my builds in terms of what techs I take is having the most options in play so that you can react to what your opponent is doing or force them to react to something they weren't expecting out of you more often, and that will allow you to overcome the widest array of situations. So range enhancement is super important. Elite Marksman, I think, is less important for Arclights than it is for Marksman, but similarly, it does exactly the same thing, range by 8 meters, attack by 23%, but it's basically just to have the ability to go carry Arclights available. You can't do it without Elite Marksman, and having it available if you happen to get an early level 2 or 3 Marksman can let you really snowball, or Arclight, excuse me, early level 2 or 3 Arclight, can let you really snowball that advantage into a very powerful mid game and force your opponent to react to those Arclights. Next, in the mandatory upgrades, I think you want Charge Shot. Charge Shot is, I think, even more important than Elite Marksman, so I would rank these Range Enhancement, Charge Shot, Elite Marksman. It just triples the attack. For 300, it triples the attack of your Arclights. Basically, this is great value anytime your Arclights are shooting something that isn't a Crawler or a Fang, so anything they don't one-shot, it effectively triples the damage that your Arclights do. This is also really good utility against enemy Steel Balls, which you might think naturally counter Arclights, and enemy Sledgehammers, because it allows your Arclights to actually just kill those units with Charge Shot, Range Enhancement, and so on. And so suddenly they have to deal with a unit that is good against both their chaff and their sort of mid-tier units, their Steel Balls or Crawlers, or Steel Balls or Sledgehammers. Finally, I think it's really important because Arclights with Charge Shot are one of the best counters to Steel Ball rushes in particular, because they will then defeat the Steel Balls with the Charge Shot damage and also be really good against the Mustangs, Crawlers, or Fangs, whatever your opponent is using to screen for Steel Balls. And it's really important to have an answer in your build for enemy Steel Ball rushes. Even though those have been recently nerfed a little bit, they're still a super powerful strategy that you need to have an answer available to. Even if you're going carry Arclights, I think you probably shouldn't take anti-aircraft ammo. It costs 300 and just allows your Arclights to shoot up, which normally they can't shoot air units. The reason I think you shouldn't do that, even if you're going carry Arclights, is what are Arclights good against? Masses of enemy units. So you can use them against Wasps, but if you're spending 300 on anti-aircraft ammo to shoot Wasps, they also probably need range enhancement. They might need Charge Shot to kill them, to one-shot them, depending on the respective levels of your enemy Wasps. At that point, you're investing so much into defeating just a random unit of Wasps. I think it's just not worth it. You could just buy a couple units of Mustangs and have them shoot up, or buy some Fangs. Those are very cheap. You could get 3 units of Fangs instead. I'd rather have my Arclights have more utility and more power in the role that they're meant to fill, which is chaff clear on the ground and occasional transition into carries against specifically Steel Balls or Sledgehammers, then have the ability to shoot up on them when I could just do that with a unit that's meant to do that. Finally, like I talked about, you can have Armor Enhancement or EMP. I think Armor Enhancement is the most replaceable of these. Armor Enhancement costs 150, increases their HP by 20%, that was recently buffed, and 60 damage is blocked when attacked. Now, 60 damage is a pretty small percentage of the amount of damage that most units in this game do, so 60 damage basically only matters against light units. Fangs, Crawlers, Mustangs, and Wasps. Arclights already crush 3 out of those 4 units, and you don't want to buy them against Wasps, so I personally think you don't need Armor Enhancement, but it is a very high value upgrade because it just costs 150 and can allow your Arclights to really tank up if that's something that you're interested in. The blocking effect also goes up with levels, so if you get a really high level Arclight, then the Armor Enhancement upgrade can be pretty high value against enemy, even up to enemy Arclights, but nothing higher damage than that. Or you can take EMP Shot. EMP Shot only costs 200 on Arclights, as opposed to 300 on Marksman, and does the same thing, but also in an AoE. So I personally think this is the way to go on your Arclights, and then you can use your Arclights as a direct counter to Steel Balls. As a reasonable counter to Rhinos, you can mix in a couple EMP Arclights to slow down and turn off the tech on Rhinos, and Rhino tech is really important, and as a direct counter to Sledgehammers. So this adds a ton of extra utility to your Arclights, and I think having EMP Shot on Arclights is better than having it on Marksman. You could also, of course, have it on both, but my personal build suggestion is that on Arclights you take EMP Shot, and on Marksman you take Fang Summoning, so that you can use those against the units that you want them to defeat already. Both of those basically double down on the strength of the unit, and so it allows you, I think, to more readily have that unit do what you want it to do whenever you want to buy it. You definitely see more disagreement on Arclights, I think, than on any of the other units that we've covered so far. A lot of high-level players pick anti-aircraft ammo. I would suggest not doing that, but you do definitely see it, so I should absolutely acknowledge that there's disagreement on there. And like I said, EMP shot on Arclights is kind of a me special. You usually don't see that, but for the reasons that I've laid out, I think it's better to do it that way, personally. So overall, I would say, in order of importance, range enhancement, charge shot, elite marksman, and then my personal recommendation, EMP shot on your Arclights. So just to quickly sum up, I'm just going to go over all of these. So let's talk crawlers. You're leaving off Subterranean Blitz, picking the other 4. On Fangs, you're leaving off Ignite, picking the other 4. On Marksman, my recommendation is you leave off EMP shot and double shot and pick the other 4. And on Arclight, my recommendation is you leave off armor enhancement and anti-aircraft ammo and pick the other 4. Like I said, my friends, I hope you have enjoyed this, and as always, thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, good on you. This has been a pretty deep dive into the abilities for Mechabellum units. I really hope this helps you in your own games, and we'll be back with part 2 again if folks like this. So do let me know if you liked it, and of course feel free to subscribe for more of this and other strategy game content, and I will catch you next time. Cheers, my friends. GG.